Hey everyone, welcome into the Buddhist Wisdom Podcast. I have one of my dear friends here with us, Paula Chichester. Paula, welcome to the Buddhist Wisdom Podcast.
Really nice to see you. Really nice to see you. Such an old friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to this. So Paula took some time out of her busy teaching schedule to come talk with us today and share some of her wisdom, share her history of, intensive Buddhist practice and all of that. And so Paula is a Buddhist teacher, longtime practitioner, musician, songwriter, as well as we're discovering already, very good friend of mine, an actual mentor. So early on in my study of Buddhism, I started around age 19 or 20, and I met Paula when I was 23. And really, for me, when I first met you, Paula, I was just like, I was so excited to meet you because I had heard about you, and I was like, wow, there's these people really doing hardcore retreat. And, I think some of my listeners know my half-baked fantasies of wanting to be Milarepa, and so I was on that trip. And so when I met you, Paula, that was part of it, where I was just like, I really want to know this person. And you went on to not only be a really good friend, but actually a mentor of mine. So I just wanted to start out with that. I just really thank you for being here again.
Yeah, well, it's just really great to see you again, because I think we parted ways about a decade ago, and I get your emails and I read them half the time. And I have to say, you're a very good writer. I'm impressed with, I knew you were smart, but still, I didn't realize your language skills were so good. So I have to say that, because you are a good writer. But what I remember most about Namsel Scott was, we were in a recording studio for quite a few hours, because when I first met him, that's what he was. He was a recording engineer, and he offered to record some of my songs for me. But we'd spend more time talking about Dharma than we would recording the songs, because we'd get there and I'd go in there and Scott would want to talk, and we just talk. What about this? We have to fix the sound over here, but he would go, so.
Totally, probably like annoying you with a million Dharma questions.
No, it was good. I was happy to talk to you.
Yeah.
I was in San Francisco.
Yeah, we can get into that, because Paula and I, just for the listeners here, we recorded more than an album together. We did I recorded an album with you, but we also did other demos.
Did two.
We did two.
We did two albums. We did two albums. Yeah.
The
only albums I ever did, because you were the only recording engineer I knew.
That is unfortunate for you, but very fortunate for me.
No. I'm the drummer, and you played drums, and you played really nice. The best, my favorite part besides your engineering part was when you played percussion, because you were really good at just adding just really tasty little bits and pieces to the music.
Thank you. So, I'd love to kick this off just, with watchers, listeners getting to know you a little bit more, Paula, because, I know you, but maybe they don't. You've been a practicing Buddhist. I think it has to be over 40 years, 35 years, something.
Well, I actually started reading Dharma books 56 years ago.
Wow.
I'm 70, believe it or not. I turned 70 this year, and I started reading Dharma books when I was 14.
Okay.
And but back then, we're talking about like 1967. And at that time, there wasn't Tibetan Buddhism. Not that we knew of. Maybe Evans Wentz had written that book about Milarepa, but, it hadn't really, at least not where I grew up in Berkeley, California, most of my life. And I was very fortunate to be in such a progressive place where there was a lot of Buddhism and Zen practitioners and people that had been down to Tassajara, and there was Suzuki Roshi and all that influence, and Gary Snyder. But I was just fortunate to be, I don't know how it happened, but I was in a class at Berkeley High School in the 9th grade where, I don't know how it happened, but we just read 2 books. We sat around like graduate students, and we read two books. One was the Bhagavad Gita, and one was the Compassionate Teachings of Buddha. And I think it was because of the Beatles. I think the Beatles had been to India, and so everyone was like, "Oh, we want to know about that." So we read those books, and then after I read that Buddhist book, I was in Big Sur, and I had this really, really profound experience that totally alienated me from life. And I'm pretty sure now, looking back, especially now that I've been experiencing more familiarity with the Dzogchen tradition, that I had some kind of experience like that. And I can remember coming back and being so changed, and coming back to my parents. I wanted to move into a closet. There was a closet like Harry Potter's, and I wanted to be in this cave. And I just had this thing. And I couldn't find any adult that could help me understand what had happened to me. And so I just kind of just got it, and plus the war in Vietnam was going on, and we were having a war in our town. And I just kind of got very alienated from my culture, and was very actively looking for a culture that made more sense, or that was a more pacifying culture. And I found it in mostly in the Zen books I was reading, because there wasn't much besides that. And but I was always a little bit afraid of Zen. Light went off. Zen culture, because it was just too harsh for me, And I had a very active mind. I had a mind that was what we would call lung now, but like nervous mind. And the thought of just having to sit there and be still and just look at my mind, I didn't think I could manage it. And so what was really helpful is then about 10 years later, or 12 years later, I met a Tibetan Lama, Lama Kunga, who had a place up in Berkeley, a Sakya Lama. Yeah. He's supposed to be the reincarnation of Rechungpa, Milarepa's main disciple besides Gampopa. And then it was like, oh, they gave me something to do with my mind, like Omani Padme Hung, but that's what it was, or just thinking about the four immeasurables and things like that. So then I had a way in to actually doing practice. Yeah. And then I met Lama Thupten Yeshe, and by then I had been, practicing yoga and qigong, and had done some Vipassana meditation. And so when I met Lama Yeshe, I was just so ripe for the Dharma that and he was such an extraordinary teacher that he introduced me to the nature of my mind. Yeah. And once, I didn't know that's what it was called. I didn't call it a pointing out instruction or anything like that, but that's definitely what he did. Yeah. And again, it was like, oh, that again, it was like, oh, there's that again, And so that's what I needed. I knew I could not pursue it. Like I just had to go for it. There was no turning back. It didn't. And at the time I had been, training as a dancer for 10 years. I just quit dancing. I just quit everything. I just like all that discipline that I was putting into dance, like 4 hours of practice a day. It was very easy. Yeah. To go into
that's quite a bit. That's a lot. Yeah. I knew you were a dancer. I didn't realize it was that intensive.
Yeah. Well, maybe it wasn't 4 hours. At least, a class almost every day. And then you do stretching and yoga and all that kind of stuff, like your mom. Your mom was a dancer, wasn't she?
Exactly. Yeah. She was a professional dancer. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I never really, I just got to the point where I was, being asked to be in performances. And then I met the Dharma, and that was it. My last performance actually was in India. It's on YouTube, actually.
Really?
Yeah. But you can see it. It's called, Entertainment at the Enlightened Experience Celebration. Nick Ribush put it on there. Oh. So it was in India, the first EEC. Yeah, I'm so young then. But anyway, so that's what happened. And then I just, Lama Yeshe said he was coming back to teach the 6 yogas of Naropa, but first we had to do a Mahamudra course with Lama Zopa. So I just signed up for everything. And then I found out about this incredible 6 months of teachings was happening in India. So it was really cool. I was in a graduate school at the time at UC Berkeley, and I was
What
working
year
with.
was this? Just to
This was
frame.
1981, I think, 81, 82.
Okay.
And I was looking for help. I worked for a professor who taught a class that was about systems thinking and how to think outside the box, because the whole department that I was in, the conservation of natural resources, was about preparing us for the upcoming climate change and the depletion of all the resources. And that, and the idea is that we needed to think differently. We needed to learn how to think differently. And so I thought, meditation and Buddhism would be a really good way. So I was trying to figure out a way to teach it at university without it being Buddhism. That's what I wanted to do, just to get, to try to get people to understand that scientists to realize there's no objectivity, that it's always subjective, that the eye's always projecting. I knew that. It was like, okay, so we need to get people to think about that so that they will understand that rational thought processes aren't necessarily as rational as people think they are.
Yeah.
So,
that's a good way to put it.
Yeah. So my professor at the time helped me. He was so cool because I didn't have the money to go to this teaching in India, but he paid me for a whole quarter of being a TA, so I'd have enough money to go to India, thinking I would come back and continue to help him teach his classes. But when I got to India, I had such profound experiences with Kabir Sangye Rinpoche teaching these high Yoga Tantra tantras, where they were teaching us how to die with awareness and go through the intermediate stage and take rebirth as a Buddha. And I'm like, wow, this is the most fascinating science ever. This is way more important, So I just dropped everything. It was a big decision, but I dropped everything and just spent the next 25, 30 years and, just doing that, nothing else. And I managed to do it without ever having to have a job. And a lot of that was because I met this really wonderful person named Roger Munro who helped support me, and we worked together because there weren't really any other people that we knew at that time that wanted to do that. He wanted to be Milarepa. He wanted to. I remember we told Lama Yeshe we wanted to become Mahasiddhas this life, right?
Yeah.
And of course, when you're 28, you think you can. You think, well, especially when they tell you, oh, you just need to do a 3-year retreat and you get enlightened. Well, I'm signing up. Let's do one, So I did one.
Wait,
but it's not that easy, and that's what it segues into, because then you run up against everything that comes with the package of being a Western person, your disembodiment, your childhood issues, your, the tension in your body and all these things that they didn't really have to contend with in Tibet, not to mention the poisonous environments we live in, So yeah.
No, sorry. I just wanted to know a little bit more about this 6 month, because a lot of the listeners, who won't know what this was. This was quite a, profound gathering that happened in the early 80s, which was called the Enlightenment Experience, basically curated by Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa Rinpoche. So I just love if you want to say a little bit more about that and like the context of that.
Well, there were 3 of them actually.
Oh, okay.
And Lama Yeshe planned these things. And I think a lot of people, I think your listeners are mostly, Dharma practitioners. And, Lama Yeshe was a Gelugpa practitioner from Sera Monastery. And, but he didn't necessarily teach like a Gelugpa Lama. He taught more like a Kagyu Lama, actually. What he taught was Mahamudra. And just something I found out just recently, I was in India, because someone told me that he shared a lot of conversations with Khenpo Tsultrim Gyatso when they were in Buksa, when they were in the prison.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I didn't know that either, but someone told me a few years ago. And because, I really learned how to meditate from Lama Yeshe, and then Lama Yeshe died in 1984. And I just thought, well, I just continued it within that lineage because that was Lama's lineage. And I just thought, well, the next thing I need to do is go study with Lama Zopa Rinpoche, his main student. But I never really found any of that in the Gelugpas until years later. Yeah. I found more resonance with the Kagyu teachings of Mahamudra from Lama Yeshe, which was very interesting because just about a month ago or 3 weeks ago, I was back in Dharamsala where all these teachings happened at McLeod-Ganj. Yeah. And I went into Lama Yeshe's room. He had this tiny little room, and there on the wall was the Kagyu lineage Lama Tonka.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't the Lama Chupa. It was, Vajradhara and Tilopa and Naropa and Marpa and Mila, it's different, it's a different tree,
Yeah.
And that really was like, okay,
Yeah, he seemed like a Rime, non-sectarian practitioner.
Yeah, he definitely was. He definitely was. He was also a Christian. I mean, he did everything. And
just for the listeners, if you just real briefly, if you want to say more, Paula, because he was your teacher. Actually, partly why I came into the Tibetan Buddhism was through the books of Lama Yeshe. So I think that's part of our connection too.
Yeah.
But yeah, Lama Yeshe is just this incredible, eclectic, Tibetan Buddhist Lama who, with Lama Zopa, was pretty early on in the West, in bringing Tibetan Buddhism into the West. They were one of the earlier ones, which, that organization now came to be known as the Foundation for the Preservation of the Mahayana Tradition. And it's been one of the larger Gelugpa organizations in the West. Just our Lama Zopa Rinpoche just passed away, so he was the heir to Lama Yeshe, but now we just lost him as well. But yeah, I just wanted to share that just so people have some background of who Lama Yeshe was.
Yeah, well, the thing is that I just want to share with people too, because a lot of people, we have this thing about, the Gelugpas, they're intellectual and they do all this debate and study, and that's true. But what a lot of people don't know is there's also an ear-whispered lineage. Lama Tsongkhapa was a yogi. He wasn't just a scholar. He was an incredible yogi who spent at least 3 years in retreat, living on just like eating one juniper berry 3 times a day with 5 or 6 of his disciples, and he just did this incredible ascetic practice and attained very high realizations. I mean, he didn't go all the way because he said he would do it in the bardo because he thought it was so important to be a monk. He didn't want to do the final, karma mudra practice. Mm-hmm. But so what Lama Yeshe wanted to do is he wanted to transmit to us this ear-whispered lineage of Lama Tsongkhapa. And so that's what happened at these 3 enlightened experience celebrations. And so the Dalai Lama, it's the one I went to, and it started in the fall of 81. Well, I got there a bit late, but the main teaching was the Mahamudra teachings that His Holiness gave, which was totally non-sectarian. And then after that, we had, it was a lot of mostly it was highest yoga tantra like Chu and Chakrasamvara and Guya Samaja. And it just blew my mind because the teachers at that time, especially Kabji Sang Rinpoche and His Holiness, I mean, when they were telling it to you, you would have the experience. So you'd be sitting there and your chakras would be going, bleh, and everything's going up and down. And you're like, what's going on here? And I remember we'd come out of these teachings on Mahamudra with His Holiness and we'd be grabbing our friends, because it's like your eye becomes very like, where is it? So you have to like go eat and, maybe, eat a whole bunch of food and maybe drink some alcohol just to calm down because we were just so high, and of course we were all still hippies back then.
Yeah.
It was just a bunch of hippies. And the thing that was different in the 80s is that it was still economically possible to not work. It was still, it was in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. And by the end of the 80s, I think it was pretty much gone. But, there was enough plentiful economy that you could work for a little while and then not work. So you could just take off 6 months and go to India. And also, it was so cheap to live in India, right? I was just in India. It wasn't any cheaper than living in the UK, pretty much. But somewhat. But it, whereas before you could live in India on $100 a month,
Yeah.
So those times have changed, and that gave people of my age incredible freedom. Like my friend Rob Priest, he spent 5 years living in India in retreat, and doing lots of practice, and Jampa Shainman and these other friends of mine, that we just had this incredible, perfect human rebirth where we could just practice,
Yeah, I call it like you are part of the first wave, of
the guinea pigs.
Yeah, if you want to call it that, first wave to meet these lineages. And and just real quick, and then I wanted to go a little bit more into like how that sparked your serious practice and long retreats. But as you were saying in the Gelugpa tradition, I think I've noticed that there's this misunderstanding that it focuses solely on intellectual pursuits, and as you said, that's a pretty big misunderstanding, because when you read the biography of Lama Tsongkhapa, it's sort of like, just the amount of mandala offerings he did,
and
I can't, and prostrations, let alone all the other commentaries he wrote and teaching and practice. It's hard to even imagine. So actually, when you read his biography, you realize he was more of a yogi than a scholar. Yet, because of his realization, he started having direct communication with the Buddha of wisdom, Manjushri, or the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And so he a lot of his transmissions also came as a form of what we would call entering the blessings directly, and having pure vision of Manjushri. So I think sometimes, I guess maybe let's just call it ignorance. I won't use the S word of sectarianism, but let's just call it ignorance. Sometimes blocks us from seeing like each of the lineages in Tibetan Buddhism are profound yogic lineages. All of them. Yeah.
All of them. And I feel really blessed. I've actually studied with some of the great teachers of all four.
Yeah.
So I although I professionally work within the FPMT, I feel really blessed I feel part of all of it, I met some of the great old Nyingma. Anyway, that's good enough. So
yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. And I think you and Roger were the inspirations for me in understanding that there was a yogic, we could say Mahasiddha, ear whispered lineage in Gelugpa tradition. Lama Zopa was teaching that, but also when I met you, I didn't understand what that was. So you really helped me to understand the profundity of that. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people don't. Even, Trungpa Rinpoche, I remember went to Crestone in 2009, received these incredible teachings from him. And I had the good fortune, I don't know why, but I got to have dinner with him the last night. And I was explaining to him, it seemed like he didn't even know the extent of the nundros that the Gelugpas have to do. It's like, before you can do a 3-year retreat, you don't do the nundros in your 3-year retreat. You do 9 preliminary practices, not 4 or 5, but you do 900,000s, before you can even begin to do a 3-year retreat, So me for Roger and myself, it took us 8 years just to get the preliminaries and the teachings that we needed to do the first retreat, at which they call it a 3-year retreat, but it's actually a great retreat, which means it's not time, it's the amount of mantras that you say. So the Vajrayogini retreat, it was like 12.5 million Vajrayogini mantras. That's a lot of mantras.
Yeah, let's get in. So I want to hear about that. So how did it go from attending these great gatherings, these enlightenment festivals, so to speak, in India with all these empowerments and teachings? How did it go from that? Well, in one way we could say, how could it not go from that to the life you've led? But to walk us through a little bit, and how did you end up in your first 3-year retreat from there? I guess.
Yeah. Well, I just got incredibly inspired at those teachings, because of the experiences that I had, and the idea of bodhicitta, and the experience of bodhicitta, and what that meant to, just this huge care for all sentient beings, and this incredible light that would just shine out, and what I could see in these beings. And I was just so inspired by the lamas. And I just thought, I was quite a naive person, and I was as a Berkeley kid who wanted to change the world. And I thought, if a Western person could develop those qualities, that I saw in these Tibetan lamas, it could change the world. If you could show in a scientific way, that this is actually this thing about death and intermediate state and rebirth was actually real. It wasn't just like a myth, but it was actually a scientifically proven method, that it would change. I really thought it would change the world, because not only that, but in order to be able to do it, you have to be virtuous. Like you have to stop hurting people in order to get the ability to be immortal, basically, So you have to become not just an immortal, powerful person, but you have to become a most altruistic, compassionate, wise person, which is what I could see as a teenager was missing from our world. So I just thought, wow, we need more Dalai Lamas, So I was like, I'm going to be one.
Why not?
How silly, I mean, now that I look at it. But so that was really what inspired me. And also, I didn't really know about a 3-year retreat, but Dharamsala, for those who don't know, it's beautiful. It's in the Himalayas. It's about what is it in meters? 2,000 meters or 2,500 meters, 7,000 feet up, and it's in this beautiful forest. And I used to love to go for hikes because I'm a big outdoor nature person. And I ran into this young man. He was this handsome young monk named Jampa Shainman, and he was just finishing a 3-year retreat. And he told me about it, and I went, "That's what I want to do. I'm going to do one." So I didn't know how I was going to do one, and it was a big decision. I had a fellowship at Berkeley. I had to leave that. My parents thought I'd completely gone nuts because I had really, and. But then I didn't know how, but I started, and I did. So I thought I'd start. So the first thing I did was I did Vajrasattva retreat, up in those mountains. And that's when I kept running into Roger, and it turned out he had the same aspiration. So, and to be honest, I don't think I could have done it by myself. There's so many obstacles. And also I'm much more of a wishy-washy pleasing kind of person, whereas he's very not like that. He's very grounded, and I'm really watery. He's very earthy. And, but anyway, so together we just put our minds together. We'd help each other. And so that's what we did. And, we just said, he said, okay, well, we'll go do retreat. So we had planned to go to Australia and just live out in the bush and do retreat. And then anyway, long story short, Lama Yeshe was giving these 6 yogas and Naropa teachings. And so I managed to, with my dad's help, get Roger to California for those teachings. And then afterwards, we were able to meet with Lama and told him we wanted to be Mahasiddhas. And he was really happy because he didn't have any other students that wanted to do that, Yeah. And so he sent us off on our first retreat, which was a year-long retreat. Combining, the 6 yogas with Vajrasattva practice.
Wow.
And
that's
then,
wonderful.
Yeah. And then he passed away in the middle of it. So, and then after that, and I kind of was the one who would come up with, where were we going to go and what we were going to do and how to get the money. But he was the one that could help make it happen. He could build houses, he could fix cars, he could, keep us safe. And so when I didn't know exactly what to do when Lama died, because that was my inspiration. And so then Lama left a will saying that he wanted all his students to do a year-long Vajrasattva retreat. And I found out there was one happening in Spain. Of course, by then I'd already done a lot of Vajrasattva. I did one in England, in India, and then I did this one for a year in California. But we went to one in Spain. And did that. It was this really cool retreat where the mantra would go 24 hours a day. And it was what Lama Yeshe left in his will. He wanted his students to do. So there was one in Spain, one in Nepal, and one in New Zealand. And people could come for periods of time. But there was a group of us in Spain that were like the core group that kept it going,
Yeah.
So
that was for a year.
Yeah, that I didn't end up staying for a year, but it was a year. It was a year, but we were there, and because in part, right about just before Losar, this is before the days of email, we actually got a letter from Lama Zopa a letter, like just sort of out of the blue. I guess I'd written him a year before or something. And I don't know how I knew where we were, but saying, I want you to stop doing Vajrasattva and prepare to do a great retreat and do these 9 nundros. And so that's what we did. Yeah. And so we had to figure out how to do that. And when we first met, I had some land near Ridgeway, Colorado, and sold that. So I had that money, and he had a little inheritance. So we used those funds to get us through those first 8 years. But we lived on, we lived on nothing. We would always find a free place to live somewhere, some broken down old house in the mountains somewhere. And we'd just live on $200 or $300 a month, because that's, and we ate rice and beans, and, our clothes were from the secondhand store. We were very, very poor.
And just for the listeners out there, and doing probably at least 8 hours plus practice per day.
Yeah.
That was your job.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. That was the job. We did it, and so sometimes when it was the better conditions we each had our own room. In the beginning we would share a room, but that didn't work very well, because, when you're practicing really hard like that, you get, we call it lung, you get, tension in your mind, and the thing is, in the beginning, you haven't the faintest idea about how to meditate, and you don't, and also we didn't, the thing I really appreciate about, like Trungpa Rinpoche's organization, and I think Mingyur Rinpoche is the same, is that they require so many hours of just shamatha on your breath before you move into anything else. But with us, we jump right into these tantric practices. And I always try to describe it. It's a little bit like you're being an artist, but you don't know what your medium is. So like if you're throwing a pot, you're trying to throw a pot. If you got a pot in front of you, you can see when it's going off sideways and you can bring it back. Or you can just tell when you've destroyed your pot. And but when you're working with your mind, you don't know when you've gone off sideways or when you've gotten too tight, until it's like 3 days later and you're like crying and screaming, or maybe you're yelling at your friend, or because your mind's gone off,
also the nature of like these, because maybe you could describe some of the nundros briefly too, but the nature of them, in my experience, is they bring up a lot of stuff too. They're moving stuff up and out. Yeah.
Especially Vajrasattva. Vajrasattva brings all your stuff up so that you can let it go. And so sometimes it's better to be by yourself. But Lamas Yeshe wanted people to do Vajrasattva retreat as a group, because then you would see all your projections. You don't see your projections if you're by yourself. Yeah. But so it's a combination of things, Scott. It's like, there's that, it brings up your stuff, but at the same time, you don't know, you're not a very skillful meditator. And so you get too tense, and then you're not chilled, you get very sensitive, and you can get angry easily or cry easily. And so, sharing a little cabin in the woods with somebody going through that's not that easy.
No. Being, Paula and I, just for the listeners out there too, we shared time in retreat, separately, but we were in the same retreat land for a while. And I was alone in that cabin, and that was hard enough, just like I couldn't deal with, just being alone, going through, I call it psychic surgery for, months on end.
I always feel bad because I kind of really encouraged you to do a longer retreat by yourself, and I realized that was too harsh of a thing.
Oh no, it was what it was. It was great. I don't know if there's another way. It's sort of like, you just jump in and you learn.
Lama Zopa said, maybe I have to take my sweater. I'm getting kind of hot. Lama Zopa, I can't as much of a thing. It's all right. I'll just be hot. Lama Zopa said one time, he said, because the whole point about Dharma, right, is you have a goal, even though it's goalless. We say we're not good. There's a goal, but you do want to attain enlightenment, and you have to do two things. You have to purify all the obstacles, and you have to create all the causes. You have to, it's like you have to clear the ground, then you have to build a house. And so the purification process, Lama Zopa said, it's like if you have a dirty cloth and you put it in the water, the dirt has to come out. The dirt comes out somehow. It just doesn't go away. So when you're doing purification practices, you experience the purification not as intensely as the karma that would ripen, but you still experience some purification. You get sick, or maybe you get angry, or maybe you have a bad dream, or maybe you know, or you're in a circuit. When I did my first Vajrasattva retreat, I was like covered in flea bites, you know. I mean, it's so there's always something, you know, and the other thing that Lama Zopa really explained to me too is that what makes a good practitioner is not so much, you know, how much they know or, you know, what a good meditator they are, but how well they can endure the hardships. That's the real sign of a practitioner, is someone who can abandon the 8 worldly concerns and endure the hardships of practice, because that kind of practice is really hardcore, and not that many people can do it, you know?
Yeah, it's true. So eventually, after 8 years, you finished the preliminaries, which are these 9 in the Gelugpa. You know, for listeners in the Kagyu Nyingma, normally there's 4 and 4. There's 4, you know, thoughts that turn the mind as the common preliminaries, and 4 uncommon, the accumulations that you're talking about now. But then, like you said, in the Gelug, they add on, you know, water bowls and these, you know, tsatsas and these other ones.
Tsatsas and burning pujas and purifying with your guru and. Yeah. But also we did 2 more of those enlightened experience celebrations. So those would take 9, some of them took 6 months and 9 months, but they were all really, really, really good. You know?
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, that was the education we got. And then the practice was the practice and so we got that education for going to India three times, and also living at Dharma centers and getting teachings from geshes. You know, getting like extensive Lam-Rim teachings or extensive. I mean, the best thing about being at that place in Spain was we got this really extensive commentary in the Lama Chopa, like 6 months of Lama Chopa commentary. Can you believe that? I mean, those of you don't know, Lama Chopa is like the heart Guru Yoga practice for the Gelugpas, which is the heart practice of their Mahamudra practice. And it's
like a sadhana, right? Just
it's a sadhana that's extended the 7 limbs, you know, if you know what the 7 limbs are. So
some of the listeners are probably, you know, unfamiliar with some of the things we're saying, but it's like it's a liturgy of visualization and mantra and aspiration and meditation. Yeah.
It's basically, like I said, you have to create the cause and you have to purify the obstacles. And so these are liturgies and practices that do that. And then the third component is making the request. It's like, you know, you can clean up the place and bring in everything you need, but then you have to also direct it to where you want it to go. I mean, you can create a lot of positive potential in the mind that creates the context for, you know, realizing interdependence, Mahamudra, Dzogchen, whatever you want to call that. You create that cause, but you have to like direct it. Otherwise, you just might end up rich next life, you know? You know what I mean? You can create a lot of extensive positive potential in your mind stream, but you have to say, I want it to go, you have to dedicate it, you know, like I want it to go to this, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, great. So just, I would love to hear then kind of how you guys ended up entering your first retreat in Vermont and what you did there and you know, all of that. Yeah.
Oh God.
I've seen the retreat cabins. They were
tiny retreat cabins. Well, what it was we had finished all the Nundras by the time we went to that second enlightened experience celebration in India. So we finished them in the end of 1989, and that was 1990. And we went to India, I think, for 7 months and had really great teachings and transmissions. And at the end of that, we sat in that little room I just told you where I saw that the Kagyu lineage tanka. And Lama Zopa said, well, where are you going to go? You know, what are you going to do? And we, he always does divinations. And so we thought we were going to go to different places. Anyway, we had to look for where we were going to do this now, you know? And so
Because just at the time, it wasn't like super common in that lineage
No, it
to
wasn't
do
common.
this kind of retreat. Yeah.
No, it was very, I mean, the thing is, the Kali Rinpoche was organizing these 3-year retreats,
Yeah.
but those were group retreats. And Sammy Ling was doing group retreats here in Scotland, but Gelugpas is very different. And the Gelugpa, you're supposed to learn everything first, like become a geshe, which we weren't. And then you go off and meditate. Whereas those Kali Rinpoche ones were sort of like school, like you go there and you do your nundros and you get your education, and then you do some short retreats on all the deities. And it's supposed, Jamyang Kongtrul's point was, then you go off and do your retreat. So that's more like getting a master's degree in liturgy and Buddhist education.
Yeah.
But with the Gelugpas, you do all that first. And then what you have to do is you just do a one deity retreat, And so you have to figure out what deity you're going to do. But the other thing is that, it was really hard to find a place because there weren't that many centers, and they all wanted money up front. They wanted, like Chenrezig Institute wanted $30,000 a piece, and we're like,
wow.
And by the time we'd finished that, we didn't have any money left. I mean, we had a tiny bit of money left, and Roger had some money left. And so that's how first we were going to go back to this place in Colorado, and we went back there, but then Roger said, well, we should really be in a Dharma center so we have more protection, from the elementals and, the other forces that the more hidden forces that can cause obstacles and retreat. He said, we should be in a place that's been blessed, and the lamas have brought protectors and this kind of stuff. So dear old Martha Tack, she had just become the director at Milarepa Center, and Roger, we just happened
in Vermont,
to get
right?
in Vermont, and Roger just happened to know her, and we got a newsletter from them somehow because we were living in Colorado, over by Gardner, Colorado, not on the other side of the mountains from Crestone.
Oh, you were in Gardner because there was a Trungpa. Was it at the Trungpa Rinpoche Center there?
No, it's
near it.
Right across the street from the Trungpa Center.
Okay, wow.
A friend of ours who was a student of the Ganden Tree Rinpoche, there was a Gelugpa. She wanted us to start a Gelugpa center there. And so that's where we'd done a bunch of our nundros. And in fact, they just built a stupa there. And so that's where we were going to do the 3-year retreat. But that's when Roger realized that nothing was there yet. So, and he wanted to be more protected. And so we ended up going to Milarepa Center. However, Martha said, you could come and do a retreat here, but your houses have to be less than 50 square feet.
Yeah.
You know how big that is? That's like most people's closets are bigger. I mean, rich people's closets are bigger than that. But I tell you, we were so determined, and I think we were somewhat naive too, but you can't believe how determined we were, it's kind of sad when I see now, because it's kind of, like, I don't have that kind of, maybe it's because I'm 70 years old, but, in the beginning, you really think you're going to get enlightened, so it's like, you got to do this, but after you've, been doing it for 20 years, you go, oh, well, maybe in a few lifetimes, so then you don't quite have the drive that I had when I was in my 20s and my 30s and my 40s and even in my 50s,
Yeah.
So, which is, what can I say, I mean, maybe one day it'll come back, but I mean, I still practice. Of course, I'm always practicing, but it's not quite that determined, I'll do at any cost kind of thing, because this was at a great cost. I mean, there we were, 40 below zero, and these tiny little houses. I mean, it was really, really hard. It was really hard.
I saw those, and this is before I met you, actually. I was at Miller, because I met the Dharma in Boston, and so we would go to Milarepa Center in Vermont often, and I just took a hike out into the woods, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure if I can do this. Like, I saw the cabin, and I was like, I don't know if I want that lifestyle. That's a bit intense, definitely.
It was really intense. It was really intense, but I think part of it was because I had spent a great deal of enough time as a young person backpacking. And, Roger had been living out in the outback, that we were kind of familiar with. And plus we'd lived in India, so we were familiar, because we didn't have running water. We didn't have a bathroom. We didn't, we did have heat. We cooked outside. in Vermont. You know how cold it is? And I almost nearly died, you know. But the thing is that we were so determined. And I remember Achak Rinpoche told me beforehand that his time in Buxadar, when they were in prison, he said, at the time when they were there, it was like horrible, horrible suffering. But when they look back, it was the best time in their lives.
Yeah.
And I think he told me that beforehand because he could see how hard it was going to be. Because we spent 6 winters there, you know, basically 5 years there. And, but when it was over with, I just couldn't live there anymore. You know, I mean, I was done. It was like, and I think that the reason why you have to do all those nundros is because it gives you the merit so that you can get through one of those experiences.
Yeah,
and Lama Zopa came to visit us, and you know, he was really impressed with the hardship and the way, because also we'd seen how the yogis lived in Dharamsala. We were living just like the yogis in Dharamsala. They had just the same kind of houses. So it was like, okay, well, if they can do it, we can do it, you know, because really it was no different. In fact, ours are a little bit better than like my guru's houses in Dharamsala, where they were in lifelong retreat, you know, and also very cold places. So it didn't seem that, I mean, maybe I was just naive, but it didn't seem that horrible. Yeah. And, but I didn't realize, I mean, I'd lived in Colorado winters, but I had no idea that Vermont winters was so much rougher than Colorado winters.
Yeah, you know? Much rougher. Yeah, and that, you know, just to segue into something, you know, you're bringing up an interesting point, which I've come across too, which is sort of like, you know, understanding our maybe even cultural limitations, our body limitations. And, you know, just curious if you had any thoughts on that, because there's a lot to say about that, but just in relation to even this, because, you know, are Tibetans just, are their bodies more built for this? Is it something cultural? What is it, you know?
I think it's both. I mean, I had to think about it a lot, especially in that retreat. And I was really grateful to the education I'd had at Berkeley in the systems approach and studying ecosystems, because I was able to think about Tibetan Buddhism in the context of its culture and in the context of the geography. And I started thinking about it, and I thought, well, for one thing, only the strong ones survived.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, their infant mortality rate was 50%.
Wow.
So probably somebody like me, I would have died before I was 5 anyway, you know? And, like, you know, His Holiness's mother had 13 pregnancies and 7 children.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
And they all would die. And so they were very tough people, you know, very tough people. I mean, look at the altitude, but also look at the environment. I looked at the environment. It's like, first of all, they didn't have clocks.
Yeah.
So our whole thing, I mean, so much about us is that we're so nervous because, you know, by the time we're 6, we have to like be at school by 9 o'clock and the alarm rings, and we, you know, and we just, we're completely, nervous and uptight compared to, I mean, like, you're going to visit somebody. It's like, not that you're 5 minutes late. It's like, oh, plus or minus 2 or 3 days you're going to show up, you know. I mean, they're so chilled, you know. They're just we can't even imagine what it's like.
This is old Tibet you're talking about.
Yeah, not now, but the lamas that I was really fortunate to meet, you know, that generation, there will never be a generation like that again.
Yeah,
there'll never be, who grew up in that. And then think about it, all their food was organic. There was nothing poisonous, you know. Their houses were not full of poisons. They were all organic mud, stone houses. So they had a completely different, stronger, quieter body, you know, and that our brain, you know, what we work with in meditation isn't just, the mind isn't here. You know, one of my teachers I like, he says, you know, wherever there's blood, there's mind.
Yeah.
It's like your mind's everywhere.
Yeah.
So if you're tense, you know, if you grew up sitting in a desk, starting when you're 5 years old, looking at a teacher, like, then it's with you for the rest of your life. And I think that if we're trying to enter into Tibetan Buddhism, we have a lot of like backtrack to do to learn how to become, to relax, and to learn how to feel safe, and to learn how to open our hearts, and to manufacture unconditional love, because most of us didn't grow up with that. So we have a lot to do to learn to make these practices work for us. And that's a lot of what happened to me for those first years, as I was trying to figure that out. And luckily I had some really good psychology books, and I had friends who taught me about Chinese medicine, and I had studied some Feldenkrais work and stuff like that. So I was beginning to unpack all of the psychological and physical tension and obstacles that I faced as a Westerner that a Tibetan didn't know the first thing about.
Yeah, and Paula, you were one of the first people to alert me to that. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just sort of misknowing or ignorance or whatever. But a lot of us come into these, when we get serious and we really want to develop qualities within these lineages. Sometimes we come in with pretty rose-colored glasses, and
we
I was
all
definitely,
do.
we all do.
do.
And I was definitely one of those people. So you were the first person, I think, pointing out to me via your own experience, hey, you got a different body, you got a different experience. You need to take care of that. Otherwise, these practices aren't accessible. And so, just to add some further questions to what you're already starting to jump into, I would love to hear like what worked for you, what didn't work for you in this arena. And, especially because, you did finish this first great retreat, which is more than 3 years, like closer to 4 years, 4.5. And then you and Roger went on to do a whole nother one. So yeah, I would just love to hear, what you started to talk about it, but things that you found.
Yeah.
That helped you to actually access these practices,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm learning more and more about it, and I'm just so grateful to the psychologists and neuroscientists today, because in the last even 5 years, there's so much more information about trauma and growing up and how we heal ourselves and what children need, and I was just looking at something today, reviewing that, because we really have to go back to our childhoods and heal that, everyone knows that, but,
what specifically, just any traumas and things like that?
Well, the fact that, but if you just think about it this way, we need unconditional love. We need to be able to express our emotions freely, not that we don't need to learn how to temper them, but what happens to most of us is we get shut down, And we also need to play, because one of the things I find even more disturbing about children now is that they're just so busy. We need to we need to know how to just be easygoing and play, and, because meditation has to be playful, not so serious, And, so if you look back at your life and see, well, was I able to do I feel my emotions? Do I know what my emotions are? And I think that for me, back in that first retreat, I realized that, so much of what was going on with me was that, I wasn't really able to express what my needs were. And so if you don't know what your needs are, that's how you end up living in a place when it's 40 below zero, because you don't have the faintest idea what you need to survive. And so when you sacrifice your own inner knowing and your gut feelings and your own needs in order to get the approval that you need from your parents, you end up being kind of wide open to getting into trouble as an adult, because you don't have your own inner compass, because you lost it in order to get the love that you needed, And I think that's one of the first things we need to look at, because if we take that into our Dharma practice, then our Dharma practice can end up harming us rather than helping us, because we don't know what our real needs are, And I don't mean neediness, but I just mean our baseline health, emotional, physical health, to find out what that is.
Basic well-being.
Yeah, basic well-being, you know, we need to start there. And how the thing that I think was kind of the most interesting development in that retreat, looking back now, was how I went about creating that inner safety, because what we need to heal, what children need and what we need as adults, is we need to feel connected to other sentient beings, you know, loved and connected, and we need to feel safe. And when you feel safe and connected and you can express yourself, then these traumas can be healed. There's nothing that can't be healed, you know. But what happened to me over the you know, 4 or 5 sessions a day, because I actually had to do a 5th session just to do my commitments, is that we're constantly—
These are 5
my meditation sessions, you know.
No, but just for the listener watcher, 5 2-hour sessions, right?
Yeah. One
so
and a
that's
half.
2 4.
No, more when there are 4 formal sessions, which are 1.5 to 2 hours. But then there was an in-between one where I would just like lie down and do my commitments, you know.
So like 8 to 10 hours per day, just to give people, you know, because this word retreat now is losing its meaning. People think you go off and, you know, take ayahuasca and have some massages and do some yoga. No, we're talking about something quite different. This is
something,
very hard work.
It's very training. It's like, you know, being a residency or something. And the way I survived it too is you need to do a lot of physical activity, you know. So I would do 4 meditation sessions, but I also did 4 physical sessions. Like in the morning, I would do prostrations. Before lunch, I'd do qigong. In the afternoon, I'd go for a walk. In the evening, I'd do yoga, you know, because you're sitting so much and your mind gets congested. You need to put a lot of space in your mind. But what I wanted to share was what came to me. And now that I've had the opportunity to study with Gabor Mate and you know, people like Bessel van der Kolk, these people now who are like the big trauma gurus who are wonderful. I think I really highly recommend, you know, reading their books and studying with them. But the thing about needing to be safe and needing to be connected is what, you know, they say is how we heal. But I realized that that's what I got from taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. Because when I would sit there and I would take refuge, because it was basically the blessings of Lama Yeshe, because Lama Yeshe told us, he said that the best way to take refuge is without any words at all. You know, you just sit and you just feel it. You know, you just sit there and you just feel this authoritative safety. You know, there's like, it's like a parent figure, you know, a Buddha, you know, who's there, who's, you know, showering you with love.
Yeah.
So it's like, it creates this inner environment of safety and peace, you know. And if you do that over and over and over again, I mean, refuge is so profound, because if you really take refuge, and then the other thing he said was that refuge is your own nervous system, that the whole point of the outer guru is to introduce you to your own inner peace. And so after a while, I mean, this is the beauty of doing a long retreat, you know, you just sit there and you take refuge, and suddenly, you know, everything just drops and you just feel really peaceful and calm and safe and protected. And that's what you need to heal.
Yeah. Wonderful. So if I'm hearing you correctly, like one of your discoveries among many you're describing here, but one of them, which I think is quite unique, is the more you did retreat, the less it became about words and thinking, and the more it became about embodiment and feeling into these practices.
Yeah. But I do think that it helped to have had a background in dance and physical activity, you know. And but then the second part was, this is why I realized that Tibetan Buddhism is so profound, because first you get this safety, and then you realize that the ultimate safety is whatever you want to call it, pristine awareness, emptiness, you know, and you begin to blend with that where you actually, you know, there is no I anymore. And so all those traumas and everything get this deep heal, you know, that I don't know if you can get that any other place, because emptiness is so much more profound, you know.
I have the same question. Yeah, I think there's, for me, just real briefly, I'll share something. I agree with you. I think there's a level we can heal relatively, like on the relative domain.
Definitely.
And then there's some recognition that the trauma is not self, that then goes to this other level of healing you're talking about. Yeah, I've experienced that as well.
Yeah. I think that's what people get in ayahuasca. I think. I don't know. I've never done ayahuasca, but But then the next step is so then you meditate on bodhicitta. So then you connect with every single sentient being in the world. And if you've already got yourself in this safe, empty place, and then you connect with your heart and just all this love, because you do the 4 measurables, and then that love goes out and penetrates out into all of space, then what's more healing than that? You feel connected to everyone, And so I realized that now that I've just in the last few years been able to study more about trauma, I realized that, Dharma has it too. It heals, if you can do it in an embodied, feeling, emotional way, not just intellectual. If you really bring it into your feeling world sense, and extend it into an energetic connectivity, with all creatures, not just thinking about it, but actually feeling it. And I'll just add one more thing to that, because I remember when the retreat had finished and I met with Fabrizio, and he said, well, didn't you miss your friends? I said, well, yeah, I sort of miss my friends, but to be honest, I felt more connected to them then, because I was in this space where I felt connected to everybody. I said, now I have to call them on the telephone because I'm not in retreat anymore. And if I don't call them on the phone, I don't feel connected. But when I was in retreat, I could feel them all,
Yeah. There's an element of what you're describing too. I don't know quite how to put my finger on it other than just using this word connection, there's something I call basic okayness, which is just recovering this sense of inner okayness that we're all born with. That's I wouldn't necessarily call that religious. It's just sort of basic psychology.
Well-being.
Basic well-being. And we all, unfortunately, most of us lose that these days as we age. But kind of reconnecting with that, and then reconnecting with for me, that's where loving kindness actually comes online. And that's as you're starting, as you're saying, where the Buddhist practices actually start to click and make sense. And I find a similar thing. I'm not in that space all the time, but I find when I am, I feel so much more connected. It's just like you don't. It's not like we don't need each other. We always need each other. It's just that there's not this extra layer of neediness on top, which I've struggled with most of my life.
Well, we all do. Yeah. No, Trungpa called it basic goodness. Your basic goodness. And I think that, the beginning of meditation is just to get that, get your basic goodness and know that that's your ground. And that when you sit down to meditate, you can connect with your basic goodness, because then you can go out in the world and not be needy. You need your friends, but not in a needy way. It's like, because you know that, like you said, I'm okay, and even though you're not okay, things are all messed up, but deep inside, you're okay. And I think that's the blessing that comes from a meditation practice,
Yeah. Beautiful. Paula, just being mindful of time.
I was wondering.
No, it's all good. I also feel
forever.
Like we could do a part 2 in the future. Just maybe to wind our conversation down a little bit. So like, how are you? What are you doing now? I know you live and teach from Braveview, right? And so maybe you could tell us a little bit about Braveview if you want, and kind of your teaching activities now.
Well, in my life, these karmic winds come and blow and pick me up, and and my life changes really fast. And this was happened this last time. Make a long story short, a lot of things happened. I was around Lama Zopa, and I got back to Land of Calm Abiding, where Scott and I lived together there for about 3 years. He was there.
This is a retreat center in the Central Coast that I lived at for 3 years. You lived at for
about 9 years, I think.
Okay, 9 years.
And I would be there now, but this new director came and told me I couldn't live there anymore.
Oh, okay.
Because I hadn't been there. I've been out teaching too much, and it's not that she said I just couldn't have a house there. Anyway, it's a long story. It doesn't matter. It was all, I think it's just, if you see things as all being a blessing, then they are, So then my friend Jeff, I just recently met him. He said, well, and he just bought this house. So it's it's an amazing place. It's very, very remote in the Shetland Islands. I think for Europe, it's about as remote as you can get, and it's far away from anywhere. The Shetland Islands are like 100 miles north of Scotland. Wow. And 100 miles west of Norway. So you're just in the middle of the North Sea, this little tiny archipelago of, and so the wind blows like crazy up here, but it's really, really beautiful. And the house has amazing views, and it's really good for my mood or meditation. And we have a little retreat house there where my friends come and do retreats. So, and so I live there, and Jeff has since become my partner, and although we still live separately, we're together. But I've lived by myself so much, I don't think I can really live with anybody all the time.
Yeah,
and
I think
he's really, he's really good to understand that, and I think he likes keeping his space too. And he's a very interesting character himself. So that's where I am. And it's interesting because all this happened, this big wind that came and took me to Europe was right after I led a retreat with Lama Zopa Rinpoche at the center in Italy, where he basically kind of gave me this big advertisement to all the 400 people that were there, and basically told them to invite me to teach and that I should teach in Europe and blah, blah, blah. So I guess my karma finished in California and I had to come here. So now I teach around Europe. And if I go back to California, I'll do a little bit of teaching there, and I'm doing less, because, for one thing, the best time of year is the summertime here. So I just want to be here in the summertime. So I'm like, tomorrow I'm leaving and I'm going to France and Sweden and places in the UK. And, I'll be gone for 7 weeks. So
to teach on a teaching tour.
I don't really call it teaching. I lead retreats. I'm not really I can't sit up there. I'm not a geshe. I can't give lectures. But and in the beginning, I thought I could never be a teacher because I'm not a big intellectual person. But it seems like when I lead retreats, people get a lot out of it, and I've gotten enough feedback now that I feel confident that it's a good thing to do.
Well, and I'd certainly say, you're one of the more experienced Western practitioners I know. So, I think, I can't imagine the depth you bring, when you're doing how do you say it? Like it's organized and you're leading a retreat, because, a lot of my experience with you was not organized. It was just hanging around, talking about music or, just on a break from a session. And you helped me to kind of go back with some new life. I mean, it's still your advice that you gave me is the advice that's probably been the single most helpful advice for me, which is just show up.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paula.
That's right. And
I'll just share the context though, for the listeners, I was struggling in practice, and I was putting so much expectation on myself to be this perfect yogi in retreat. And you just told me, just relax, man, just show up. You said, you know what I do? The only discipline I put on myself is just show up to the session. That's it. And I was like, oh, and that's actually been something that's grown for me over the years. It's not like I got it right away. That's something I had to practice. But that piece of advice is very precious. So I thank you for that.
Because every session's different. Every session's different. And some, and you can't label them good or bad. That's what I like about Mingyur Rinpoche. Just be with it. Just be with it. Don't try to push it. Don't try to change it. Just do the best you can. And that's good enough,
Yeah.
Because the thing that I've appreciated so much is that it's not so much the content of the meditation, but it's the awareness of what's going on. So as long as you're aware of what's going on, you're making improvements, and that's the important thing. And I think what's exciting for me now is putting together, the Kagyu, Nyingma, Gelugpa within, because my practice is the sadhanas I do and the places I teach are Gelugpa, but sort of informing them and also bringing in all this new stuff about trauma and healing and putting that all in the context of, tantric sadhana, to make it so that it works for us, so that transformation is a reality, not just sitting there and saying prayers. We want to change,
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I got this image in my mind. We need like a college, for this. Because we didn't get to it today, but part of one of the questions I want to ask is like, where is Tibetan Buddhism moving in the West? And I feel like we're talking about it right now, which is this element of like the other components we need to not only survive, but thrive in doing these practices.
And it's not just us now. The Tibetans need it too, because they've joined the modern world and they have all the same issues we have now. And they're traumatized just like we are now. That's what I mean when I say that generation will never see another generation like that,
Yeah, it's a good point. Paul, this has been wonderful. I would like to continue this sometime if you're open to it.
Yeah, well, it's just really nice to see you, because you are one of my dear friends, and I have to say it's been so wonderful to see how you've grown.
Oh, thank you so much.
Really, really, and the fact that you've stuck with it and that you do what you do and you do it so well. You're so professional. I mean, I'm just a bozo, but the way you're able to, I mean, it was always like that, though. You're always the one that could like teach me how to use my computer, and, because I'm old school, So I just really appreciate the way you can bring them both together. It's really good.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I don't know. I feel I just show up every day.
Yeah.
That's all. There's one little thing I'd like to share, which has been on my mind lately, which maybe you could appreciate. A friend shared some personal advice he received from Sonam Rinpoche on sort of struggling with life's issues and relational stuff and all that.
Yeah.
And Sonam Rinpoche shared that, he's not just on cloud nine all the time without problems. He's got tons of projects going all the time. There's always demands of him. And so sometimes when he wakes up, he just thinks to himself, today I'm going to suffer for others. And I thought, wow, that's so beautiful.
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
And so for me, this sense of just showing up includes that now.
Yeah, it does. Thank you. That's very smart.
Sorry.
Because we do suffer for others.
And that's okay. Like that's not a bad thing, I think, is what that means.
No, because until we're enlightened, the winds are going up and down and all around, and all we can do is just be with it is as it is.
Yeah, exactly.
Suffer for others and be good for others. And I don't know, man, bodhicitta, I couldn't live without that, the thought of sentient beings and caring for all sentient beings and becoming enlightened for all sentient beings. There's so much suffering in the world that just holding that little light keeps me going, and I wake up in the morning and just thinking about bodhicitta is how I can manage. So
it's such a big thing. I don't even it's everything for me. And it's such a tough one too, such a challenging thing to develop. I'll leave it here, but so Paula, where can people find you, hear your teachings, check out your music? We can talk about that. You're also a musician.
Yeah, a friend of mine in 2019 insisted that I have a website, because I'm like allergic to computers. I don't do it very well. And so there is a website. I don't do anything with it much, but it's Brave View, BRAVEVIEW, like the brave view, like a courageous view.org.
Yeah, perfect.
And it has pictures of the house. Yeah, pictures of the place. Yeah. So thank you, Scott. This is pretty long. I don't know if anybody listened to all of it, but anyway.
I think there's gems, and so for people who want to find gems, they have to dig. And so I think there's worth in that. Yeah. So I'll put braveview.org. I'll put the link on in the notes in the YouTube video, so you can find it there. If you're listening on Spotify or iTunes, just go to the YouTube and braveview.org and please check out Paula's teachings. I mean, she's one of my inspirations, and just an amazing gem you wouldn't know about unless friends made a website for her. So there you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you, dear.
Thank you, Paula.
Let's be more in touch.
Yeah, I would like that. And really, really, really good luck. Safe travels on your upcoming.
Yeah. You too. Good luck with your new life.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Ciao.
See you, my friend.